I sold my company for $50 million. My lawyer gave a bizarre warning. Tell your parents you're $5 million in debt. I trusted him and made the call. The next morning exposed their dark betrayal. I sat in a sleek, glass-walled boardroom in downtown San Francisco, staring at a thick stack of papers sitting perfectly centered on the mahogany table. It was 4 o'clock in the afternoon on a Friday, and the city outside was buzzing with weekend energy. Inside, however, the air was entirely still. My hand hovered over the signature line of the final page. I am 32 years old, and for the last 10 years, I have not had a life. I built a tech startup from nothing. I lived on cold coffee, for hours of sleep a night, and the constant, crushing anxiety of making payroll. I sacrificed relationships, skipped holidays, and burned myself out to the absolute core. But right now, with one stroke of an expensive pen, it was all over. I was selling my company for $50 million. You would think I would be crying tears of joy, popping champagne, or jumping up and down. But I just felt empty. Physically sick, actually. The weight of a decade of stress doesn't just vanish because you add a bunch of zeros to your bank account. Julian, my lawyer, sat across from me. Julian is the kind of guy who doesn't blink much. He is sharp, purely analytical, and entirely unimpressed by emotion. He watched me sign my name, meticulously gather the documents, and slide them into his leather briefcase. "Congratulations, Madeline," he said, his voice completely flat. "The wire transfer will clear by Monday morning. You are officially entirely financially independent." I let out a long, shaky breath and picked up my cell phone from the table. My thumb instinctively hovered over my mother's contact name. I wanted to call them. I wanted to tell my parents that I had finally done it. That all those missed Thanksgiving dinners and ignored birthdays were for a reason. I wanted to hear my mother say she was proud of me. But before my thumb could tap the screen, Julian reached across the table and firmly placed his hand over my phone, pressing it face down onto the wood. "What are you doing?" I asked, looking up at him in confusion. "I am giving you the most important legal advice you will ever receive," Julian said, leaning back and folding his hands. "Do not tell your parents you just made $50 million. Do not tell anyone." I frowned, a spark of defensive anger flaring in my chest. "They are my family, Julian. I've been working toward this my entire adult life to prove to them that I could do it. I want to share the good news." Julian's eyes narrowed slightly. He had been my corporate lawyer for 5 years. He had seen the way I scrambled every time my mother texted. He knew the unhealthy dynamic. "Madeline, sudden wealth acts like a spotlight. It illuminates everything around you, especially the people. It does not change who they are, it simply amplifies their true intentions. If you call them right now and say you are rich, you will never know if the love they give you tomorrow is for you, or for your bank account." "So, what am I supposed to do?" I asked, my voice rising. "Just lie to them forever?" "No," Julian replied calmly. "You are going to test them. I want you to go home tonight. I want you to call your mother, and I want you to tell her that the deal fell through in the worst way possible. Tell her you are being sued by your investors for breach of contract. Tell her you have lost the company, you have 0 assets, and you are currently $5 million in debt." I stared at him like he had lost his mind. $5 million in debt? That's incredibly cruel, Julian. They will panic. They'll be terrified for me. Will they? Julian asked, raising one eyebrow. Or will they be terrified for themselves? You pay me a small fortune to protect you from corporate predators, Madeline. Let me protect you from the domestic ones. Call them tonight. Tell them you are bankrupt and $5 million in debt. See who shows up for you when you have absolutely nothing to offer them. I wanted to argue. I wanted to tell him he was a cynical, paranoid lawyer who didn't understand family. But deep down in the dark pit of my stomach, a terrible, sinking feeling told me he was absolutely right. The drive from the city down to my apartment was a blur of highway lights and swirling thoughts. My knuckles were white on the steering wheel. $50 million. $5 million in debt. The two numbers fought a war in my head. Why was I so terrified to make this phone call? If my family loved me, it wouldn't matter, right? They would rally around me. They would offer me a place to sleep. They would tell me that money comes and goes, but family is forever. But I knew better. I just didn't want to admit it. To understand the panic squeezing my chest, you have to understand the people who raised me. My mother, Victoria, is a masterclass in psychological manipulation. She treats love like a currency, heavily inflating its value and only spending it on her terms. My father, Nathan, is a man obsessed with appearances and status. He measures a person's worth exclusively by what neighborhood they live in and what brand of car is parked in their driveway. And then there is Savannah, my younger sister. She is 28 years old, has never held a steady job for more than 6 months, and is the undisputed golden child of the family. While I was working 80-hour weeks in my 20s, building my software from scratch and eating ramen noodles, Savannah was finding herself on yoga retreats in Bali, funded entirely by my parents. They never asked me how I was paying my rent, but they always made sure Savannah had the latest designer handbag. I used to think that if I just worked harder, if I just became more successful, they would look at me the way they looked at her. I remembered a specific incident when I was 25. Savannah had somehow managed to rack up $20,000 in credit card debt. She had been taking extravagant vacations and buying clothes she couldn't afford. My parents were furious, not at her, but at the situation. The holidays were approaching and Victoria called me, crying, saying the stress of Savannah's debt was ruining the family's peace. She heavily implied that since my tech company was starting to make a small profit, I should help my sister. I didn't just help. I paid the entire $20,000 balance in full. I emptied my savings. Why? Because I am an idiot with a severe savior complex. I thought buying her out of debt would finally earn me a seat at the adult table. I thought my mother would finally say she was proud of me. Instead, at Thanksgiving dinner that year, Victoria raised her glass and made a toast to Savannah, praising her for overcoming financial hardships and growing as a person. They didn't mention my name once. I sat there, eating dry turkey, realizing that I was nothing more than a walking ATM machine for this family. Yet, here I was, 32 years old, a multi-millionaire, and my hands were shaking at the thought of disappointing them. I parked my car in the underground garage of my apartment building. I sat in the darkness for a long time, listening to the hum of the engine before turning it off. I was exhausted. I was so tired of trying to buy their affection. I realized Julian's test wasn't just about protecting my money. It was about forcing me to look at the ugly truth I had been avoiding my whole life. I took a deep breath, grabbed my bag, and marched up to my apartment. I was going to make the call. I was going to rip the Band-Aid off once and for all. My apartment was completely dark when I walked in. I didn't bother turning on the lights. I walked straight to the kitchen counter, poured myself a tall glass of tap water, and stared at the city skyline through my window. The digital clock on my microwave read 8 o'clock in the evening. It was time. I pulled my phone from my pocket, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I pulled up my mother's contact. Victoria. I took one last, shuddering breath, hit the call button, and put it on speakerphone, setting it down on the cold granite counter. It rang 3 times. Every ring felt like a physical strike to my chest. Hello? Madeline. Victoria's voice came through the speaker. It was her usual tone, breezy, slightly inconvenienced, like I had interrupted her evening wine time. I really only have a minute. Your father and I are watching a movie. What do you need? I closed my eyes and channeled every ounce of exhaustion and stress I had felt over the last 10 years. I let my voice crack intentionally. Mom, I need to talk to you. Something terrible has happened. The line was quiet for a second. The breezy tone vanished, replaced by immediate caution. What is it? Are you hurt? She didn't sound worried about my health. She sounded worried about inconvenience. No, I'm not hurt physically, I stammered, leaning heavily against the counter. It's the company, Mom. The acquisition deal. It completely blew up. The main investors found a loophole in our proprietary code licenses. They pulled out. But it's worse than that. They are suing me for misrepresentation. The lawyers said I am personally liable. I forced out a sob that honestly wasn't too hard to fake, given how incredibly tense I was. Mom, I lost everything. The company is gone. My accounts are frozen. I am $5 million in debt, and I have absolutely nothing left. I stood there in the dark waiting. I waited for the gasp. I waited for the frantic questions of a concerned mother. Oh my God, Madeline, are you okay? Or, please come home right now, we will figure this out together. That is what a normal mother would say. That is what a mother who loved her child would say. Instead, there was nothing but dead, heavy silence on the other end of the line. It lasted for 5 seconds. 10 seconds. I could hear the faint sound of the television in the background being muted. I could hear her breathing. Mom? Are you there? I whispered. When Victoria finally spoke, her voice was entirely different. The pitch had dropped. It was cold, clinical, and completely devoid of any maternal warmth. Madeline, are you telling me that you owe $5 million to corporate creditors? Officially? Yes, I cried, playing the part. Mom, I don't know what to do. I'm terrified. I might lose my apartment. Have these creditors, she interrupted, speaking very slowly and deliberately, mentioned the family trust? Have they looked into your legal ties to our assets? The question hit me like a physical blow to the stomach. She wasn't asking how I was going to eat. She wasn't asking about my mental state. She was asking if my imaginary debt was going to touch her money. I don't know, I lied, my voice shaking with genuine shock this time. My lawyer said they will go after any asset connected to my name. Another long, agonizing silence. I see, Victoria said. Her voice sounded like ice cracking. Listen to me, Madeline. Your father and I need to process this information. We cannot have you bringing this kind of chaotic, massive liability to our doorstep right now. Do not call Savannah, do you hear me? Do not worry your sister with your failures. Mom, please, I just need to talk to someone, I have to go, she snapped, cutting me off completely. We will contact you when we have decided how to handle this. Goodbye. Click. The call ended. The dial tone echoed in my dark, quiet kitchen. I stood there for what felt like hours, staring at the phone. My own mother hadn't even asked if I was okay. In the span of a 3-minute phone call, I had gone from being her daughter to being a financial liability she needed to quarantine. I sank to the floor, pulling my knees to my chest. Julian was right. I was completely alone. I did not sleep that night. How could I? I spent the hours pacing the hardwood floors of my apartment, my mind spinning out of control. I drank glass after glass of water, trying to flush the panic out of my system. My brain, desperate to protect me from the trauma of rejection, started making excuses for my parents. That's what victims of emotional abuse do, right? We rationalize the cruelty. I told myself that Victoria was simply in shock. Finding out your child is $5 million in debt is a massive blow. Maybe she hung up because she was crying. Maybe she and Nathan were staying up all night, frantically calling financial advisors to find a way to help me. Maybe they were just trying to protect my little sister from the stress. I kept looking at my phone, willing it to ring. I wanted my dad to call and say, "We're coming to get you, kiddo. We'll figure this out." But the screen remained black. Midnight came and went. 1 o'clock. 2 o'clock. The city outside my window grew completely silent, leaving me alone with the suffocating realization that I meant nothing to them. At exactly 3 o'clock in the morning, the silence in my apartment was shattered. My phone vibrated violently against the granite kitchen counter. I practically threw myself across the room to grab it. I expected to see my mother's name. I expected an apology. But it wasn't Victoria. It wasn't Nathan. It was a text message from Riley. Riley is my cousin on my father's side. She is 26, works as a bartender, has a sleeve of tattoos, and is universally regarded by my snobby parents as the ultimate black sheep of the family. My parents heavily discouraged me from associating with her, claiming she was low class. But honestly, Riley was the only person in our extended family who ever felt authentic. I stared at her name on the screen, completely confused. Why was Riley texting me at 3 in the morning? I unlocked my phone. The notification showed 1 text message and 4 photo attachments. I opened the text first. It read, "Maddie, I am so incredibly sorry. I know I'm not supposed to show you this, But I couldn't just sit here and let them do this to you in the dark. Please look at these screenshots before you go over there tomorrow. Do not let them blindside you. Call me if you need me. My blood ran cold. The rationalizing voice in my head instantly died. My fingers trembled so violently I almost dropped the phone. Whatever was in those pictures, it was bad enough to make Riley break family ranks in the middle of the night. I took a deep breath, steeling myself against the incoming pain, and tapped on the first image. It was a screenshot of an iMessage group chat. The group was titled Family Updates. There were 6 people in this chat: my father, my mother, my sister Savannah, Uncle Declan, Aunt Mary, and Cousin Riley. I was not in the group. I never even knew this chat existed. Looking at the timestamps, the conversation had started at 8:15 in the evening. Exactly 10 minutes after my mother hung up the phone on me. I zoomed in on the first message, my stomach tying itself into a tight, agonizing knot. I was about to read exactly what my family truly thought of me when they believed I was broken, bankrupt, and bleeding. The first text in the screenshot was from my mother, Victoria. She didn't waste time with pleasantries or grief. Victoria, emergency family update. Madeline just called. Her company failed completely. She is being sued for fraud and is officially $5 million in debt. She has absolutely nothing. There was no pray for her. There was no we are heartbroken. It was a sterile, tactical report. I scrolled down to the next message. It was from Uncle Declan, Nathan's brother. A man who always asked me for free tech advice at Thanksgiving. Uncle Declan, good Lord. If she owes that kind of money, the corporate lawyers are going to tear her life apart. Nathan, are the creditors going to look at the family trust? You need to cut ties right now before they come after our capital. My chest tightened. Not one person asked if I had a place to live. Then, a text from my sister Savannah. The sister whose $20,000 debt I had paid off. Savannah, wow. I literally always told you guys her little computer company was a massive scam. This is so embarrassing for us. What if her name is in the papers? I can't be associated with a bankrupt fraud. She doesn't deserve any of the family money anyway. Reading my sister's words felt like getting stabbed in the throat. I scrolled to the second screenshot, swiping with a numb thumb. My father, Nathan, had chimed in. Nathan, Declan is right. We have to protect the family assets immediately. I am calling our estate lawyer at dawn. We are going to trigger the moral turpitude clause. Her massive debt and impending lawsuits prove financial instability. We will legally sever her from grandmother's trust fund to protect the principal balance. Aunt Mary replied, are you sure you can do that so quickly? What if Madeline fights it? And then came the final message from my mother, Victoria. A message so deeply wicked, so completely devoid of human empathy, that I actually threw up. I leaned over my kitchen sink and dry heaved until my throat burned. I rinsed my mouth with cold water, tears streaming down my face, and looked at the phone again. Victoria, she won't fight it. She is desperate and broken right now. We will act poor, tell her we can't afford to help her, and let her drown in her own mess. It's the only way to save Savannah's inheritance. If we act fast tomorrow morning, we can get her to sign the forfeiture paperwork before she even realizes what she's giving up. Let her drown. My own mother. I sat on the cold kitchen tiles and let myself cry. I cried for the little girl who tried so hard to get perfect grades to make them proud. I cried for the 20-something woman who bought them expensive gifts just to be invited to dinner. I cried for the 10 years I wasted seeking validation from people who viewed me as nothing more than a legal liability blocking my sister's payday. I cried for about 20 minutes. And then, something miraculous happened. The tears simply stopped. The crushing weight of anxiety that I had carried on my chest for my entire life suddenly evaporated. In its place, a cold, sharp, and terrifyingly clear rage settled into my bones. They wanted to see me broken. They wanted me to sign away my grandmother's legacy to fund Savannah's lazy lifestyle. I stood up from the floor, my vision crystal clear. They had no idea who they were dealing with. I wasn't their desperate daughter anymore. I was a CEO worth $50 million. And I was going to destroy them. By the time the sun came up, painting the San Francisco fog in shades of gray and pale pink, I was already dressed and out the door. I wore a simple black turtleneck, dark jeans, and absolutely no makeup. If they wanted a broken, defeated woman, I would give them an Oscar-worthy performance. But first, I needed my general. At 7 o'clock in the morning, I pulled my car into the parking lot of a greasy, run-down diner about halfway between the city and my parents' wealthy suburb of Palo Alto. The diner smelled like old bacon grease and bleach. I walked to a booth in the very back. Julian was already there, wearing an immaculate gray suit that looked ridiculously out of place on the cracked vinyl seating. He was sipping black coffee, reading the morning financial paper. I slid into the booth across from him. I didn't say good morning. I just unlocked my phone, opened the screenshots from Riley, and pushed the device across the sticky table. Julian set his paper down. He picked up the phone, adjusted his glasses, and read through the messages in complete silence. His facial expression did not change once. He didn't gasp. He didn't offer me pity. When he finished, he simply locked the screen, slid the phone back to me, and took a slow sip of his coffee. I take no pleasure in being right about this, Madeline, he said quietly. Don't lie, Julian. You love being right, I replied, my voice completely devoid of emotion. Explain the legal mechanism my father is talking about. What is the moral turpitude clause, and how does it relate to grandmother's trust? Julian leaned forward, instantly slipping into lawyer mode. Your grandmother was a very smart woman. She bypassed your parents entirely and set up a generation-skipping trust fund. It contains roughly $8 million in assets. The stipulations are clear. You and Savannah do not get full access to the capital until you turn 35. You are 32. Currently, your parents act as the trustees. That means they manage the investments and handle the distributions. And the clause? I asked. The clause, Julian continued, is a standard firewall. If a beneficiary becomes a severe legal liability, say they are convicted of a major felony, or they declare catastrophic bankruptcy, the trustees have the power to revoke their beneficiary status to prevent creditors from seizing the trust assets. Your father believes your fake $5 million debt gives him the legal ammunition to trigger this clause, strip you of your half of the trust, and route all $8 million directly to Savannah. I let out a short, humorless laugh. So they are going to try and trick me into signing it away today. Julian reached down to the floor and hoisted a massive, incredibly thick manila folder onto the diner table. It landed with a heavy thud. Yes. But what Nathan and Victoria do not realize is that I have been monitoring this trust for the last 5 years on your behalf. I had my forensic accountants prepare this file just in case a day like today ever arrived. I looked at the thick folder. What is in there, Julian? The truth, he said, his eyes turning cold. Your parents are not panicking about your debt because they want to protect the trust, Madeline. They are panicking because if you go bankrupt, a federal bankruptcy court will audit your financial history, including the trust fund. And an audit will reveal that your parents, acting as trustees, have been illegally embezzling hundreds of thousands of dollars from the principal balance to fund Savannah's lifestyle and their own luxury vacations. They are desperate to get you to sign your rights away today so they can cover their tracks before you turn 35 and demand a full accounting. A chilling silence fell between us. The betrayal wasn't just emotional, it was a calculated, multi-year financial crime. My parents had been stealing from me to pay for the sister who mocked me. Julian, I said, looking him dead in the eyes. Are you free this morning? For you, he replied, a sharp, dangerous smile finally appearing on his face. I cleared my entire schedule. Let's go see your family. If you're feeling angry on Madeline's behalf and eager to see how she turns the tables, please take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Don't forget to comment the name of the city you live in below. Every comment is a huge support to help the video reach more people. Thank you so much. The drive to my parents' house in Palo Alto usually takes about 45 minutes from the diner, but that Saturday morning, it felt like a march to the executioner's block. I followed Julian's sleek black sedan in my own car. The fog was burning off, revealing the perfectly manicured lawns and towering oak trees of my parents' ridiculously expensive neighborhood. Everything in this zip code looked flawless on the outside. Every hedge was trimmed to the millimeter. Every driveway was swept clean. It was the perfect metaphor for my family. A beautiful, flawless exterior hiding an absolute wasteland of rot and decay underneath. I pulled into the circular driveway and parked behind my father's imported luxury SUV. I took a moment to look in the rearview mirror. My face was pale, my eyes looked tired from the lack of sleep, and my plain black clothes made me look small. I looked exactly like a woman who had lost everything. Julian had parked down the street, out of sight. The plan was for me to go in alone first, to let them fully commit to their betrayal on paper, before he made his entrance. I took a deep breath, grabbed my purse, and walked up the pristine stone steps to the heavy oak double doors. I didn't bother knocking, I still had my key. When I pushed the door open, the silence in the massive foyer was deafening. The house smelled like expensive vanilla candles and lemon polish. There was no smell of breakfast cooking. There was no warm family chatter. I walked slowly into the formal living room. The air was incredibly tense, heavy with rehearsed anticipation. My mother, Victoria, was standing by the marble fireplace. She was wearing a tailored cashmere sweater set and perfect pearl earrings, looking like she was ready for a country club luncheon rather than a crisis intervention for her bankrupt daughter. When she saw me, she didn't move. She didn't rush forward to hug me. She didn't offer me a cup of coffee or a glass of water. Her face was a mask of practiced, solemn concern, but her eyes were cold and calculating. "Madeline," Victoria said, her voice dropping to a theatrical whisper. "Close the door. We don't have much time." I looked past her. My father, Nathan, was sitting in his oversized leather armchair. He was wearing his weekend golfing clothes, his jaw set in a hard, uncompromising line. He completely refused to make eye contact with me, staring instead at the coffee table. And then there was my younger sister, Savannah. She was lounging sideways on the expensive cream-colored sofa, wearing designer silk pajamas that I had probably inadvertently paid for. She was scrolling through her phone, her thumb moving lazily across the screen. When I walked in, she didn't even look up. She just let out a quiet, dismissive sigh, as if my catastrophic financial ruin was terribly boring and cutting into her weekend relaxation time. I stood in the center of the room, letting my shoulders slump. I forced a slight tremble into my hands. "Mom, Dad," I whispered, letting my voice crack perfectly. "I am so sorry. The lawyers said the creditors are going to take my apartment by the end of the month. I have absolutely nowhere to go. I don't know how I am going to survive this $5 million debt." I waited for the maternal instinct. Even after reading the terrible text messages at 3 in the morning, a tiny, foolish part of my inner child hoped that seeing me physically broken in their living room would snap them out of their greed. I hoped Victoria would break character, wrap her arms around me, and tell me it was going to be okay. Instead, Victoria clasped her hands tightly in front of her. "Madeline, this is a mess. A catastrophic, humiliating mess. Your father and I have been up all night consulting with legal professionals to figure out how to do damage control. You have put this entire family at massive risk with your reckless business decisions." She was blaming me. She was actually spinning a fake story about consulting lawyers all night to save me, when I knew for an absolute fact she was scheming to cut me off. The audacity was almost impressive. "Have a seat, Madeline," my father finally spoke, his voice hard and commanding. He pointed to the single chair opposite the sofa. "We need to handle the legalities before the financial courts open on Monday. We do not have time for tears today." I walked over to the chair and sat down slowly, keeping my eyes fixed on the floor to hide the absolute disgust boiling inside me. On the large glass coffee table directly in front of me sat a thick stack of legal documents. There must have been 30 pages there, neatly clipped together, with bright yellow sticky notes pointing to various signature lines. A heavy gold fountain pen rested right next to the stack. Nathan leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. He adopted a very corporate, detached tone of voice. "Madeline, the situation with your $5 million debt is legally radioactive. As you know, the family trust fund set up by your grandmother has significant capital. If your corporate creditors discover you are a listed beneficiary, They will absolutely petition the federal bankruptcy courts to freeze the trust and seize the assets to satisfy your debts. I looked up at him, playing the role of the confused, terrified daughter. But I don't get access to that money until I am 35. How can they take it? Creditors have aggressive ways of attaching liens to future distributions. Nathan lied smoothly, without even a blink of hesitation. We cannot allow your failure to destroy the family capital. We cannot allow Savannah's future to be wiped out because you mismanaged your company. So, our estate lawyers have drawn up a standard firewall document. He slid the thick stack of papers across the glass table toward me. I looked down at the first page. At the very top, in bold, capitalized letters, it read, "Irrevocable forfeiture of beneficiary rights." I felt my heart pound a slow, heavy rhythm in my chest. If I hadn't read those text messages, if I hadn't met with Julian at the diner, I might have actually believed them. I might have been panicked enough to just sign whatever they put in front of me to protect the family. That was their entire strategy. They were weaponizing my loyalty and my fear. What exactly does this mean? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. If I sign this, I lose grandmother's trust forever, right? I lose my entire half of the inheritance. Victoria stepped forward, moving closer to my chair. She lowered her voice, adopting that sickeningly sweet, fake soothing tone she always used when she was gaslighting someone. "Madeline, sweetheart, you have to look at the bigger picture. It is for your own good. You are clearly not capable of handling large-scale finances. You just lost a massive company. You owe $5 million. If we leave you on the trust, the creditors will take it anyway, and you will still be left with nothing. By signing this, you ensure the money stays safe within the family. We have to protect your sister's future. You understand that, don't you? Protect Savannah's future. The sister who had never worked a 40-hour week in her life. The sister who was currently wearing $400 pajamas while I was supposedly facing homelessness. But what about my future, Mom? I asked, looking directly into her eyes. I wanted to see if there was any soul left in there at all. If I give up my inheritance, how am I going to survive? I have no money. Will you and Dad help me pay my rent? Will you help me buy groceries until I can find a job? Victoria stiffened. The fake maternal warmth instantly evaporated, replaced by a cold, practical wall. Madeline, your father and I are retired. We live on a fixed income. We simply cannot afford to take on a dependent at our age, especially one with legal troubles. You will have to declare bankruptcy and figure it out like an adult. We are giving you the opportunity to do the honorable thing here and protect the family name. It was breathtakingly evil. They were literally telling me that they were going to steal my $8 million inheritance, and in return, they wouldn't even buy me a loaf of bread. They were tossing me out of a moving car and asking me to pay for the gas on my way out. I looked down at the documents again. I reached out with a trembling hand and picked up the heavy gold fountain pen. The trap was set, and they thought I was stepping right into it. As my fingers wrapped around the cold metal of the pen, Savannah finally decided she had been quiet for too long. She sat up on the sofa, stretching her arms above her head lazily, before reaching for her phone on the side table. She unlocked it and pointed the camera directly at me. "Hey, hold on, let me get a video of this for the family chat," Savannah said, a cruel, mocking smirk spreading across her face. Uncle Declan is going to want to see the exact moment the great, successful tech CEO officially hits rock bottom. I froze, staring at the camera lens pointing at my face. "Savannah, please don't record me right now," I said, putting a hand up to shield my face. I didn't have to fake the distress in my voice this time. "Oh, stop being so dramatic, Maddie," Savannah laughed, a sharp, grating sound. She kept the camera steady. "You always thought you were so much better than me because you lived in the city and worked all the time. Look at you now. You're a total failure. Say hi to your new life working at a coffee shop for minimum wage. Actually, you probably can't even get hired there with a fraud lawsuit on your record." My father didn't reprimand her. My mother didn't tell her to put the phone away. They just watched. Victoria actually seemed to agree with her, crossing her arms and looking down at me with an expression of pure, unadulterated contempt. They were enjoying this. They were enjoying watching the daughter, who made them feel insecure, finally be brought down to nothing. "Just sign the papers, Madeline," Nathan barked, losing his patience. "Stop stalling. The longer you sit there whining, the more risk you put on my assets. Sign your name at the bottom of page 1, initial page 2, and then you need to leave. We have the estate lawyer waiting for a fax." I slowly lowered my hand. I looked at Savannah, smiling behind her phone screen. I looked at Victoria, standing like a queen watching a peasant beg. I looked at Nathan, red-faced and annoyed by my mere existence. I burned their faces into my memory. I wanted to remember exactly how they looked in this moment of perceived victory, so I would never, ever feel guilty about what was about to happen next. I pulled the paperwork closer to me. I uncapped the gold fountain pen. I pressed the tip to the signature line on the first page. I let my hand shake violently, intentionally dragging out the seconds. 1, 2, 3. Just as the ink was about to bleed onto the crisp white paper, the heavy oak front door of the house swung open. It didn't just open. It was pushed open with authority. It hit the entryway wall with a loud, echoing thud that made everyone in the living room jump. Savannah dropped her phone onto her lap. Nathan stood up from his armchair, his face instantly turning purple with outrage at the intrusion. Heavy, deliberate footsteps echoed on the marble floor of the foyer, walking directly toward the formal living room. I didn't look back. I just slowly pulled the pen away from the paper, carefully capped it, and set it down on the glass table. The terrified, broken daughter act was officially over. I sat back in my chair, crossed my legs, and took a deep, relaxing breath. The cavalry had arrived. Julian stepped through the archway into the living room. He looked like an absolute shark walking into a tank of very stupid goldfish. He was wearing an immaculate, razor-sharp gray suit, holding his expensive leather briefcase in one hand. His posture was perfectly straight, and his face was carved from stone. He stopped at the edge of the seating area, his cold eyes sweeping over my parents and my sister. "What the hell is the meaning of this?" Nathan bellowed, stepping forward. "Who are you? You can't just walk into my house. Get out before I call the police for trespassing." Julian didn't even flinch. He walked right past my father, approached the coffee table, and placed his hand flat over the 30-page document I was supposed to sign. He looked down at me. "Good morning, Madeline. I trust you haven't signed anything yet." "Not a single letter, Julian," I replied, my voice completely steady and clear. Victoria's eyes darted between Julian and me. The confusion on her face was palpable. "Madeline, who is this man? What is going on?" Julian finally turned his attention to my mother. "My name is Julian Hayes. I am the senior partner at Hayes & Croft Corporate Law, and I serve as Madeline's primary legal counsel." He then looked directly at my father. "And I am here to instruct my client to immediately cease any interaction with this fraudulent paperwork." "Fraudulent?" Nathan scoffed, puffing out his chest. "Listen here, Mr. Hayes. My daughter is $5 million in debt and facing federal lawsuits. That document is a standard legal firewall to protect our family trust from her creditors. It is entirely legal." Julian tilted his head slightly, a dark, humorless smile touching the corner of his mouth. "That is a fascinating legal strategy, Nathan. It would be quite brilliant, except for one minor detail." Julian paused, letting the silence stretch until it was almost suffocating. "Madeline is not in debt. She is not being sued. She does not owe anyone $5 million. The living room went so quiet you could hear a pin drop. Savannah stopped breathing. Victoria's mouth fell open slightly. Nathan stared at Julian, his brain struggling to process the words. "What do you mean she isn't in debt?" Victoria stammered, her voice high and breathless. "She called us last night. She was crying. She lost the company." "She called you last night under my explicit legal instruction," Julian said, his voice ringing with absolute authority. "It was a stress test. A test to see how you, as the trustees of her grandmother's estate, would react to a catastrophic financial event. And you failed spectacularly. Because the truth is, as of 4 o'clock yesterday afternoon, Madeline successfully closed the sale of her technology firm. She walked away with $50 million in completely liquid assets. Watching my family process the number 50 million was like watching a horrific multi-car pileup in slow motion. The color completely drained from Savannah's face. She suddenly looked incredibly sick, realizing she had just recorded herself mocking a woman richer than anyone she had ever met. Nathan's jaw actually twitched as his brain short-circuited. But it was Victoria who reacted the fastest. The survival instinct of a true manipulator kicked in. The shock on her face instantly melted into a wide, beaming, absolutely terrifying fake smile. 50 million? Victoria gasped, pressing a hand to her chest. She took a step toward me, tears of joy instantly pooling in her eyes. Oh, Madeline. My beautiful, brilliant girl. I knew you could do it. We were just so worried about you last night, we didn't know what to do. But this is incredible news. We need to celebrate. She actually reached her arms out to hug me. I didn't move. I just stared at her, feeling nothing but cold disgust. Sit down, Victoria, Julian commanded, his voice cutting through her fake joy like a whip. We are not here to celebrate. We are here to discuss the federal crimes you and your husband have committed. Victoria froze, her arms still halfway outstretched. She slowly lowered them, the fake smile fracturing into a look of genuine panic. Crimes? What are you talking about? We haven't done anything. Julian picked up the fake forfeiture document from the coffee table and dropped it into the nearest trash can. He then set his leather briefcase on the glass surface and popped the gold latches. He pulled out the massive, incredibly thick manila folder he had shown me at the diner. It landed on the table with a heavy, intimidating thud. Let us stop pretending, Nathan, Julian said, opening the folder. You did not rush to draft forfeiture papers at dawn because you were afraid of Madeline's fake creditors. You drafted those papers because you were terrified of an audit. You knew that if Madeline declared bankruptcy, a federal court would subpoena all of her financial ties, including the generation-skipping trust fund set up by her grandmother. Nathan's face turned a dangerous shade of pale gray. He took a step back, suddenly looking much older than his 60 years. You see, Julian continued, speaking clearly for the room. I have spent the last 5 years quietly monitoring the activity of that trust on Madeline's behalf. And my forensic accountants found exactly what you have been hiding. For the last 10 years, you and Victoria, acting as the trustees, have been illegally bleeding the principal balance dry. Julian pulled out a stack of highlighted bank statements and threw them onto the glass table. Let's review the numbers, shall we? 3 years ago, a wire transfer of $120,000 was moved from the trust's investment account to a private LLC owned by Savannah. The memo line claimed it was an educational grant. Savannah used that money to fund a lifestyle blog that produced zero revenue and shut down in 4 months. Savannah whimpered on the couch, pulling her knees up to her chest. Julian pulled out another document. 2 years ago, a withdrawal of $85,000, marked as property maintenance. The money went directly to paying off Nathan's gambling debts at the country club. And last year, $50,000 withdrawn to pay for Victoria's luxury European river cruise. Julian leaned forward, resting his hands on the table, trapping my parents in his gaze. You have embezzled hundreds of thousands of dollars from your own daughter's inheritance. When Madeline turns 35, the trust automatically dissolves and transfers to her control. That transfer triggers an automatic accounting review. You knew you were going to be caught. You knew Madeline would see the missing money. I watched my mother begin to physically shake. Her manicured hands were trembling so badly she had to grip the back of a chair to stay standing. So, Julian said, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper. When Madeline called last night claiming she was completely destitute and ruined, you didn't see a tragedy. You saw a miracle. You saw the perfect excuse to trigger the moral turpitude clause. If you could trick her into signing away her beneficiary rights today, you could sever her from the trust entirely, route the remaining millions to Savannah, and completely bury the evidence of your theft before the audit at age 35. You were perfectly willing to let your daughter become homeless just to cover your own tracks. The silence in the room was suffocating. There were no denials. There was no outrage. There was only the crushing, undeniable weight of the truth. They had been caught. My father slumped into his armchair, burying his face in his hands. Victoria stared at the floor, breathing heavily, completely out of options. I looked at the people who had raised me, the people I had spent my entire life trying to please, and I realized they were nothing more than common thieves dressed in designer clothing. They didn't love me. They didn't even love Savannah, really. They just loved the money. And now, their game was completely over. The power dynamic in the room had completely inverted. 10 minutes ago, I was the terrified victim begging for scraps of sympathy. Now I held absolute, unmitigated control over their entire lives. I stood up from my chair and walked over to the coffee table, standing right beside Julian. "So here is how this is going to work," I said. My voice was calm, steady, and devoid of any warmth. "You have two options today. Option 1. Julian takes that folder of forensic accounting evidence, drives directly to the local FBI field office, and hands it over to federal agents. He will also notify the IRS. Embezzling from a generation-skipping trust is a massive federal crime. You will both be indicted, you will both stand trial, and given the dollar amounts involved, you will both go to federal prison." Victoria let out a choked, terrified sob. "Madeline, no. Please. You wouldn't do that to your own parents. We can pay it back. We can fix this." Option 2, I continued, completely ignoring her tears. I reached into Julian's briefcase and pulled out a single, crisp, incredibly simple legal document. I placed it on the glass table next to the gold fountain pen. "You both sign this document right now. It is a formal, irrevocable resignation of trustee rights. By signing this, you immediately surrender all control, all access, and all management of grandmother's trust fund. The control transfers to me, effective immediately." Nathan dropped his hands from his face. His eyes were bloodshot, burning with a mix of humiliation and pure, toxic rage. "If we sign that," he growled, his voice shaking, "we lose the legal protection. We won't have access to the capital. We won't be able to pay the property taxes on this house. We won't be able to maintain our lifestyle." "That sounds like a you problem, Nathan," Julian interjected smoothly. Suddenly, Savannah jumped up from the sofa. Her face was streaked with mascara tears, her voice high and hysterical. "Maddie, you can't do this. If Mom and Dad lose control of the trust, I lose my monthly allowance. I won't be able to pay for my apartment in the city. I won't be able to pay off my credit cards. You are going to leave me with nothing." I turned to look at my sister. The sister who, just 20 minutes ago, was recording me to mock my supposed poverty. "I am not leaving you with nothing, Savannah," I said coldly. "I am just taking back what was never yours to begin with. You are 28 years old. It is time to get a job." I looked back at my father. He was staring at the paper like it was a loaded gun. "You are destroying this family," he spat at me, his face twisted in anger. "You are tearing us apart over money. You are a cold, ungrateful monster." I didn't flinch. I didn't cry. I just looked at him with absolute pity. "I didn't destroy this family," I said quietly. "This family was destroyed the moment you decided that covering up your theft was more important than my survival. You valued money over me my entire life. So now, I control the money. Choose. The pen or federal prison." Nathan stared at me for a long, agonizing moment. He was looking for weakness. He was looking for the little girl who just wanted her daddy's approval. But that little girl died at 3 o'clock in the morning when I read those text messages. Seeing nothing but steel in my eyes, Nathan let out a defeated, rattling breath. He reached forward with a shaking hand, picked up the gold pen, and signed his name on the line. He threw the pen onto the table. Victoria stepped forward, sobbing uncontrollably now, and hastily scribbled her signature next to his. It was done. The crown had been passed. They had officially signed away the only thing they ever truly loved. Julian picked up the signed resignation of trustee rights. He reviewed the signatures carefully, nodded once in satisfaction, and slid the document safely into his leather briefcase. The war was over. I had won. I had $50 million in the bank, complete control of my grandmother's $8 million trust, and I had successfully excised the cancer from my life. I was ready to turn around, walk out the heavy oak doors, and never look back. "Well, Madeline," Julian said, his voice softer now, almost respectful. "That concludes the legal severing of your family ties. However, there is one last piece of business we need to attend to before we leave." I frowned, looking at him in confusion. "One last piece? What else is there? I thought we got everything." Julian reached deep into the inside pocket of his suit jacket. He didn't pull out another legal brief or a bank statement. Instead, he pulled out a small, heavy envelope. It was made of thick, ivory-colored parchment paper, deeply yellowed with age around the edges. It was sealed shut with a thick stamp of deep red wax. Victoria stopped crying. She stared at the envelope, her eyes widening in recognition. "Where did you get that?" she whispered, her voice trembling with a new kind of fear. Julian held the envelope out to me. "Your grandmother gave this to the senior partners at my firm 10 years ago, shortly before she passed away. She gave us very strict, legally binding instructions regarding its delivery." I took the envelope from his hand. It felt heavy. The parchment was rough beneath my fingers. "What were the instructions?" I asked, my heart suddenly beating a little faster. "We were instructed to hold this envelope in our secure vault," Julian explained, looking directly at my mother. "We were only to give it to you, Madeline, if your parents ever attempted to illegally revoke your beneficiary rights, or if they were caught embezzling from the estate. Your grandmother specifically stated that this envelope was only to be opened when you finally saw your parents for who they truly were." The air in the room seemed to vanish. My grandmother had known. All those years ago, before I had even started my company, before I had realized how toxic my family was, she had seen the truth. She knew her own son and daughter-in-law were greedy, manipulative people. She knew they would eventually try to destroy me for the money. "No," Victoria gasped, taking a sudden step forward, reaching her hand out desperately toward the envelope. "You don't need to read that, Madeline." My mother was sick at the end. She was paranoid. She didn't know what she was writing. "Please, just give it to me." For the very first time in my 32 years of life, I did not back down from my mother. I didn't try to placate her. I simply held up my hand, palm facing outward, in a gesture of absolute, commanding authority. "Stop right there, Victoria," I said, my voice echoing loudly in the silent room. And she did. She froze in her tracks, completely subdued by the tone of my voice. She finally understood that she had zero power left over me. Without breaking eye contact with her, I slid my thumb under the flap of the ivory envelope and broke the red wax seal. It snapped with a loud, satisfying crack. I pulled out the contents. Inside, there was a single piece of folded stationery covered in my grandmother's elegant, looping handwriting. Beneath the letter, heavy and cold against my palm, was a solid brass key. I unfolded the stationery and began to read my grandmother's letter silently. "My dearest Madeline, if you are reading this, it means my worst fears about my son and his wife have come true. I am so deeply sorry that you had to experience their betrayal. I always watched you trying so hard to earn their love, and it broke my heart because I knew they were incapable of giving it. I set up the trust fund as a test for them, but this envelope is my true legacy for you. I always knew your strength would come from surviving what others tried to break in you. I knew you would grow into a brilliant, capable woman. That is why, 10 years ago, I secretly purchased a private, 50-acre estate in the mountains of Vermont. It is completely off the books, fully paid for, and the property deed is securely in Julian's briefcase, registered exclusively in your name. The trust fund was just money, Madeline. This estate is a sanctuary. It is a place where they can never find you. Take the key. Walk away from the ruins of this family and go build a beautiful life. You were always my greatest pride. With all my love, Grandmother." I read the letter twice. A single tear slipped down my cheek, but it wasn't a tear of pain. It was a tear of profound, overwhelming relief. I wasn't unlovable. My grandmother had loved me. She had seen my worth when no one else did, and she had spent her final days ensuring I would have a safe place to land when the storm finally hit. I folded the letter carefully and slipped it into my pocket. I picked up the heavy brass key and held it tightly in my fist. I looked up at the three strangers standing in the living room. Nathan, defeated and angry. Victoria, pale and terrified. Savannah, crying over her lost credit cards. I felt absolutely nothing toward them anymore. No anger, no sadness, no desire for revenge. Just a vast, peaceful emptiness. "We're done here, Julian," I said softly. I turned around and walked across the marble foyer. I opened the heavy oak double doors and stepped out into the bright morning sun. The air smelled crisp and clean. As I walked down the stone steps toward my car, leaving the perfect, toxic house behind me forever, I finally took a full, deep breath. I was 32 years old, I had $50 million, a secret estate in Vermont, and for the first time in my entire life, I was completely, beautifully free. So, as I sit on the porch of my grandmother's Vermont estate, sipping coffee and permanently blocking their numbers, I have to ask you all. My parents say I destroyed our family over money. Savannah claims I left her destitute out of pure spite. Am I the bad guy here? Or did I just survive the trap they set for me? Let me know your verdict in the comments. Thank you for watching my story. If you found yourself holding your breath during this, hit that like button. Make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss another crazy family drama. Share this with someone who needs a reminder to always trust their lawyer. See you in the next one.